Welcome, everybody, to this Friday edition of the Belonging Project. Today, we are talking about part two of navigating conversations on anti Black racism. Last time we had Paula, July 17th. She talked about 7 do's and 7 don'ts. If you have not viewed that webinar, please go to the website and look it up. It is incredible. It is good. The video is on YouTube, and there are lots of tips and lots of learnings there. We could not get to all the questions, and so we decided to have a second session where we will address your questions. We sent out a link. You sent in your questions. Some of the questions were set in the chat last time. We've compiled all of them, and we're going to do our best to answer your questions. In addition, you'll have an opportunity today to add more questions using the question and answer function on WebEx. So, what is the Belonging Project? The Belonging Project is a national collaborative led by SIFART of law firms, legal departments, bar associations, consultants, you name it, who have a common goal, and that is to support diverse law students and lawyers who are impacted by the pandemic. We do not want this pandemic to be the excuse for diversity and inclusion efforts to halt or to lose momentum in the legal profession. We don't want a repeat of 2008, and we want to be part of the solution. So check out the resources of the Belonging Project. It has 4 anchors. 1, a virtual hub of resources. 2, webinars such as this directed to diverse law students, diverse lawyers, and anyone who has a leadership position who wants to be more inclusive in their leadership. It also has a coaching program, and right now we are accepting applications for people who would like a coach. With a coach, you have one-on-one coaching for a 3-month period. We're also accepting applications for mentorship. So please apply, and we'd be happy to match you with a mentor. Just so you know, if you've applied for a coach before and you applied for a mentor before, you may still have to do that again, because as we've put on the website, we had a technical error with the original link that we were using. So now I'm going to turn it over to the fabulous, amazing Beyonce of diversity and inclusion, Paula Edgar.
Well, today I will not sing, I promise. But hello to everyone who is on the line. Corey, thank you for having me participate again. I'm very happy to be doing so. So I'm Paula Edgar. I am an attorney. I'm also a partner in Inclusion Strategy Solutions, LLC. I am a bar leader. I am an innovative diversity and inclusion advocate. I am a lover of personal branding and self-advocacy through social media. I'm also a mother, and in the pandemic of both COVID-19 and increased racism in our society, and as such, I am suffering. But I am here with you all today in order for us to do what the Belonging Project is supposed to do, which is advance inclusion and understanding so that we can be better at all the things that we do by helping you be better at the things that you do. And so we wanted to compile some of the questions that we received last time, as well as some additional ones. And we definitely want your questions. So either in response to what we were saying as we go along, or new questions or ones that you had in reserve, please do think of this as an interactive opportunity for you to say, hey, I've always wondered about X thing and I want to ask it, or I have this scenario and I would like some feedback. You know, it's rare that you have an opportunity for 2 people who are very passionate and informed about this space to be here in response to what your needs are. And as such, before I start, Corey, can you please introduce yourself?
Peru, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Sci-Fi Shaw. That is just a title. I am a Black woman, immigrant, oldest daughter of 4 children to a West African family, born in Canada, raised in Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, 18 years in Kansas City, and a 1-year resident of the fabulous state of Illinois. I am passionate about inclusion and diversity. I am passionate about equipping and empowering individuals to succeed despite challenges. I focus very much on igniting fire and courage in people, in groups, to tear down problematic paradigms and barriers that exclude, oppress, and marginalize others. I'm an advocate, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. My husband made sure to remind me last time that I left out wife in my introduction at another seminar. So I am all of those things, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So what we're going to do is we have some questions that we are going to pose. And so I'll start on some, Corey will start on the others, and then we'll just kind of banter back and forth conversationally and go through these questions. And so the first question is, what is the correct terminology? Black, African American, or people of color? And so if you are looking to address, for example, people who look like me and Corey, the generic answer, the one that's probably the most appropriate, is Black. However, I might be African American. I might be Caribbean American. I might be not American at all, but but from someplace else and have this color. So I identify as Black. Someone says to me, Paula, are you African American? The answer is technically yes, but also technically no, because my family is from the Caribbean. So the response that I want to give to you is that if you say to me, Paula, as an African American, XYZ thing, and I say to you, actually, I refer to myself as Black, what you need to do is hear that and then refer to me as Black. That it's really as simple as that. And I think I want to just, for our host here, you're not on mute. Not you, Corey. Okay, good. Just wanted to let you all know that. Okay, so it really is depending on your interaction. Now, if you say Black people, you're being more inclusive than if you say African Americans, because there's a lot of people who are Black who are not African American. Okay, but oftentimes people want to say African Americans believe XYZ thing because it sounds more politically correct. And there's something inherent in not wanting to actually use the word Black, which does speak to anti-Black racism in this country. People are nervous. So I'm hearing some sound from the other, so not me, not Corey, but the other person on the line. It doesn't seem like it's mute. Okay, there you go. Now you're mute. Thank you. So it seems as if the reticence to say Black has to do with political correctness, but also think about this. There's so many things affiliated with the term Black that are not good, that utilizing Black towards people or anything else might seem like, am I supposed to do this? Is this the correct term? And I'll say to you, generally, yes. But if someone corrects you, hear that and respond as such. It doesn't mean then that everybody else who you speak to may not refer to themselves as Black. The key to inclusion is to listen to what is being asked for and to comply should you be able to do so. Let people tell you how they want to be referred to in terms of their gender pronouns, their names as opposed to nicknames, and how they identify. That's it. It's not magic. It's just that. Corey, what do you want to add?
I wanted to add also part of this discussion is being respectful. And I think you've already made that case about, being respectful about how people want to be called. Mm-hmm. And you start to see this where people have mixtures of race. So there are people who identify as Black, but technically are mixed race. And I see sometimes people want to get in arguments about that. Like, for example, I remember when Barack Obama was elected and people were celebrating him being the first Black president. And I remember a female partner at a firm that I was working at. Well, first of all, she didn't like the election result, but as she was walking by the foyer, when one person was saying, what an exciting, what an amazing place we've reached as a country, she snapped about, well, it's not that great, but then she also added, and also he's not Black, he's he's biracial. We don't get to tell other people how to identify. But also, there has been a history in how Black people have been referred to. From Negro, if you look at some of the writings of people we absolutely admire, people who are trailblazers, they use those words. And even one of our justices, during a period where people were moving away from Negroes to Afro Americans to African Americans to, there are generational reasons and legacy reasons on why some of these terms were picked to redeem the negativity from prior words. And so, even more important, and we had a question. One of the questions we were just asked was,
About
is it okay to,
self-identification.
yeah, is it okay to ask people? Absolutely.
Mhm, mhm,
You can say, which would you prefer, Black, African American, and somebody may tell you something other.
mhm,
Something else to also note is sometimes people assume that Blacks who are not African American, when they say I'm not African American, I'm Black, that they mean it as a slight.
mhm,
Sometimes we actually mean it as respect.
mhm,
Sometimes we actually mean it as deference, as in, I recognize your ancestors have paved the way for me as an immigrant,
mhm,
that my people were paving a different road.
mhm, mhm.
So anyway, that's all I would add.
So I just want to, because always in the education space, is there other terms that are banded around? And so just to give some clarification, people of color is also a term that is used. It is not equal to Black. It's not. And oftentimes people will use people of color out of that same reticence to say Black, right? And so if you mean Black, say Black. Now, the reason why the request or the suggestion was to use Black as sort of the neutral as opposed to African American is because it is more inclusive. However, when you're talking to individuals, it's absolutely appropriate to say, how do you identify? But if you're making full statements, or you want to say the people, the insert word here, people at our company feel X, it shouldn't be African American unless you specifically know that everyone who is in your company identifies as African American. It's more appropriate to say Black. Now, another terminology that you might have seen, particularly recently, because there's been a lot more use of it, is BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And it is a terminology that is used to sort of encompass all of that whole group, as groups who have been marginalized and not prioritized in the past. So just thought giving you that additional context would be helpful, and doing exactly what you're doing, continue to ask questions as need be. Corey, your question is this: what are unique challenges Black people face in society different from Indigenous and other people of color?
It's an excellent question, and I think it ties very closely to what you just said in explaining Black, Indigenous, people of color, and distinguishing between Black and other colors, and calling a thing its name. Uh, when we lump people together, there are sometimes people of color, in generalizing works, because there's similar things we're facing. For example, we all are subject to racism. However, our experiences are not the same. And in order to address a problem, you have to name it, and you have to name it with specificity and enough detail in order to address it correctly. And so, while different groups of people in this country have had experiences of racism, the Black story is different than the story of the first peoples here, than the story of Asian Americans. And that has to be recognized. Same with the Hispanic and Latinx community, especially when you're talking about the relationship between the United States and Mexico. So, some of the things that are unique for Black Americans, they're the only group that were held as property in what can only be described, in my perspective, as a Holocaust, in the sense of how people were mass brought from the continent of Africa, devalued, dehumanized, and kept in slavery for hundreds of years. It's the only group of people where, written into the Constitution that they were three-fifths of a person. And let's clarify, they meant men. Those of us who were women, they weren't even thinking about us or worrying about us. We have Jim Crow. And yes, some of these things affected other groups, but there are very specific biases and stereotypes that go with different groups of people. So even in the workplace, different groups of people of color may face racism, but the concept of being lazy, that's attributed to Black people. Perceiving Black men as dangerous, that's very specific, and it's tied to a history and a legacy in this country of painting Black people as needing to be controlled and enslaved because they're dangerous and less intelligent. There's also the legacy of slavery. So people often like to say, well, slavery was so long ago, we shouldn't be talking about it. But the truth is, the institution that created slavery also created a structure that describes race in America. And race in America has created that construct also of whiteness, where whiteness is defined as opposed to blackness, which is why different groups of people can come into the country and at first be marginalized, Irish, Italian, but are allowed to become white. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why you can't conflate different groups of color, and you have to be very specific when we're talking about anti-Black racism. Another reason is the product of racism and the product of the concept of whiteness in being the opposite of Blackness is we also have colorism, where even amongst Black people, the lighter you are, there are consequences. Well, the same differential plays out. It's why in so many areas you see Black and brown people at the lowest end of the spectrum economically and historically. So, I mean, we could have a whole webinar about this, but when you start thinking about the length of the story, the depth of the story, the way in which the biases and isms have been systemized, you have to treat each group differently, just like you have to treat the Native American story differently. Um, it's unique.
Agreed 100%. And the only thing I would want to add is the continued story that is happening in terms of anti-Black racism, right, in this country, and the effects of systemic racism, and the institution of slavery, and how that has been institutionalized in many places. So, in healthcare, in education, in housing, in incarceration rates, pretty much all the places and spaces in which we need to be able to thrive as human beings and as collective groups. The difference is profound for Black people. And so when, and this is a question that I get asked a lot as a consultant is, other than the situation with George Floyd, this is a quote from the other day, other than that, why are we focusing on anti-Black racism right now? And in that dialogue that I had with this person, I said, let's talk about how Black people affect your life. This was a white man, 60 plus, and he went in and started talking about how, he adored his nanny who was Black, and he's got a really good friend who he golfs with who was Black. And so I use that prompts as a way to kind of to personalize interactions and to have understanding. And I said, let's think about those specific people, right? Empathy is a real good place of bringing people along. How have they been affected by what is going on now? And there was something about his face, we were in a Zoom, that just shifted where, right, it was like, oh, right, sometimes thinking about a collective does not actually catalyze people the way that we would hope. But when you personalize it, it's like when you hear people talk about sexual harassment and they say, well, now that I have a daughter, Paula, now that I have a daughter, I understand why sexual harassment is bad. To which I always answer, who did you date before? But anyway, so the point is that there definitely is a priority right now in terms of this, and there's a difference in how and why we should be thinking about the Black experience and specifically anti-Black racism. So my question is,
hey, before you go to your next question,
yes, go ahead.
What is ironic about what your client friend said is, other than George Floyd,
yeah,
but that's the point.
Yes,
we would not have a George Floyd if there wasn't a specific anti-Black racism problem that was systemic, generational, institutional, and structural.
Yes.
Okay, next question.
And has not stopped.
And has not stopped.
I reflect on, I'm at a loss for knowing all the names.
Yeah.
I am, right? I literally said the other day, I need to be more informed about all of the new hashtags. And for me, it's like reducing people's lives to, like, your life has become a hashtag. But there's a recent incident in which a man was literally, again, 10 people surrounding him within a prison, essentially killed. And there's so much happening that these people who are people are, turning into hashtags and becoming just a part of this rote discussion as opposed to being prioritized and valued for who they are individually, and then thought about collectively why this is happening to Black people in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular for these things at the hands of the police.
Mm-hmm.
That's another webinar.
Mm-hmm.
So
It segues very well to your next question, Paula.
oh yes. So my question is, why is it wrong to say you're blind to color? I know the answer generally, I do, but I want to tell you how it really sort of solidified for me. I was in a conversation with someone who said, what if I said to you, I'm blind to gender? Right? And so thinking about how we want to say, as a good person, because I'm a good person, I'm blind to color. I don't see color. It doesn't affect the way that I interact with you. Number one, it's never true. It's never true. Unless you have some sort of anti-bias spray that I haven't been able to find on Amazon yet, it's just not true, right? So it's whether you might have a bias towards or against. Everything triggers how we interact with each other. The end. But to say that you're blind means that you're not seeing me and valuing me for who I am. Right? That's not what the ask is. The ask is to absolutely see me, see who I am, see how I add value, see what I might need, modulate your communication because it's me and because of how I identify. So saying colorblind means that you're not going to treat me the way that I need to be treated, which doesn't advance inclusion, which doesn't advance belonging. And so while it may seem like if I don't focus on this, I'm being fair. No. That's not what is happening. And actually, by wanting to do that, you're being unfair to everyone, right? And so it is imperative that we see color, we value race and identity and all of the other pieces of who makes us special, and modulate in order to accommodate that. A good manager says, I see you as to who you are, and we're going to connect because of that. And you'll tell me what you need, I'll tell you what I need, and we'll come to a space where we can have a relationship that is productive. If you say, Paula, I'm going to treat you the same way I treat Jim, then you're not seeing me, and I'm not going to flourish under your leadership. And then you're going to be frustrated because I'm not acting the way in which you want me to, or at least trying to. So you must see people, right? And so given that our charge is to talk about questions about anti-Black racism, it is specifically and even more traumatizing to say to a Black person, I don't see color, in an attempt to try to be fair. That's just not what's happening.
To people, you don't see color, you minimize the experience. What you're saying to me is, that feeling of terror that I may have had when I was just pulled over, I can't discuss it with you because you don't see color. And it's most likely that when I tell you about that experience, you're going to be one of those people who tells me, oh, but are you sure that had anything to do with race? One thing I started saying because of an experience that I had in college is that people who say they're colorblind will get me killed. And, people usually laugh at that. And I'm like, I say jokingly to make a point, but it's true. Because if you are truly colorblind, which means you don't care about my race and you don't care to know about what that means for my reality, you're going to take me someplace where I'm not safe, where you assume I'm going to be safe because it's safe for you. You are going to take my children and do something with them swimming and not think about the fact that their hair is going to do something different than your kids' hair. It's impractical to say that. You would not have a child that burns easily amongst 3 other children that don't burn easily and say that you're going to treat them the same. So thank you so much, Paula. I love that example.
Of course. And I love the clarification you gave on it, because it's absolutely true. We have to see and value people for who they are. That is what belonging is, right? It's not everybody the same. So, and the good thing about that is that that's across race and gender and other diversity characteristics, right? It just means I see you, and you can share with me what you need, and I can share with you what I need, and that's where we're trying to get to. So, okay, good. So the next question is very easy, and it's for you.
Okay, I don't like this. What's the question?
this is a submitted question. I'm so tired of listening to Black people being outraged about a few bad cops killing Black people. Where's the same outrage about Black on Black crime, which happens way more often?
Okay. So I will start with this, and I got my phone out because I'm going to pull up the rate of white on white crime because I think that's important in this conversation. But for those people who say they're sick and tired of hearing Black people talk about a few bad cops killing unarmed Black people, I can promise you and assure you that we as Black people are tired. We are sick and tired of being killed and seeing our brothers, our sisters' bodies dead in the street and their blood soaking the ground. It triggers all kinds of memories and all kinds of legacy for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I can promise you that the frustration that anyone may feel about us having the discussion is less than the pain of those of us who experience it. So let's just put that out there. This conversation and that question is very much based in a zero sum approach and an either or analysis. We can care about more than one thing at a time. And if people actually spent time in communities, Brian Stevenson talks about this when he talks about his work on justice, that we have to get proximate to the issue, get proximate to the people, get close. And that's what, Paula, you and I talk about when we talk about empathy, right? When we talk about seeing people. If you actually see people and you pay attention to what's going on in these communities, you will know that they care about crime. It's actually insulting to say that they don't. I have never lived in a city where there was a portion of the city that had crime and violence, that didn't have neighborhood watches, didn't have campaigns against racism, and didn't have all kinds of things. Also, it's disingenuous to speak about crime if we're not going to talk about poverty, if we're not going to talk about racism in housing, in finance, in education, in employment, because crime follows poverty, the kind of crime that people like to talk about, not the white collar crime and the Wall Street crime that decimates entire communities and families, but we don't rank in the same way, but that's another webinar. Uh, though the crime that we like to talk about is really related to a bunch of other things. Now, when we're talking about um, police interactions, we're talking about something that has a very long memory for communities of color and specifically for Black communities. Now, we're talking about a country where the history of policing in the South came out of slave patrols and came out of white people, regardless of class or position, being allowed to police Black bodies. And then in the North, you have a different history, but very much this confluence of policing being used to keep communities of color and Black bodies in check, to police, white flight and keeping neighborhoods separated, segregated, whatever you want to call it. And so there's a long history. And what's most important in the distinguishing between murders and death from crime versus police violence is that one is state sanctioned and one is backed by the law. There's a difference between me being assaulted on the street by some stranger than my husband assaulting me. One I trust. One has a job to love and protect me. The other doesn't. And when state bodies, government functions misuse power, it does more to destabilize us as a country, as a community, because it speaks directly to our ideals and our principles and our values. And I'll just say this because, again, this could be a whole webinar on its own. We have laws about drunk driving. And there are people passionate about drunk driving. There are other things that kill people more than drunk driving, and there are other things that kill people less than drunk driving. But we still don't say, why are we talking about drunk driving? Black on black crime is actually a derogatory phrase because most crime is committed in the neighborhoods where people, the perpetrators, live, which means black on black crime is similar in rate to white on white crime. And white people don't commit crimes any less than black people. So it's a red herring.
Yes, it is. And even in the asking of it, it is racialized in terms of how the press and the media have made it a terminology that continues to be utilized in this sort of debate culture around racism and appropriate responses, et cetera. The term black on black crime is really reflecting on, to your point, that we live in segregated neighborhoods. Right? And that's why the crime is the way that it shapes out to be. But the reporting of it is also very different. And so that needs to be thought about. And I sat in a class a few years ago where the instructor said, watch what you ingest. The same way you wash your fruit, the same way you cook your food, filter what you ingest in your mind, in your readings, etc., because it will shape your prejudices and your biases in a way that you may not be intending. Because there's a lot of Black people who also say black on black crime without an understanding, because it's been socialized for us to be that way. And so we have to be very thoughtful about the terms that we use. And there's another question we're going to get to later, which speaks about these terms that I'm excited to get to. But I wanted to add one more thing about this piece about a few bad cops. My issue is less with the few bad cops, because there's a few bad in every group. My issue is cultures that allow for few bad cops to put their knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds without intervening. That there's no accountability amongst colleagues because the culture is such that it culturally devalues Black lives. It culturally allows for this policing of bodies, to your point, Corey, in this way that there's wild abandon. What can't you do without being stopped? And we see this continually. We saw this in coverage of here in New York City of the protests that happened post George Floyd in the Ahmaud Arbery, and the myriad of names that we can now call out. Is that things are happening, other bad actors are doing things, and their colleagues are looking the other way or looking directly at them and doing nothing. And that's why I listen, I have family members who are police officers, the same way, like, I have a Black cousin. I have family members who are police members, but the debates that we have are, if you cannot hold your colleagues accountable, then we got to dismantle this bad boy, because that means the culture is not protecting me. And that's what our tax money goes to. That's what the expectation is. And if I'm in a space where literally my child, who is an 8-year-old son, Black boy, says to me, is it okay for me to talk to that police officer? Then we have a problem societally. So that's my jumping onto the block to talk, but go ahead, Corey.
And Paula, so you opened up something for me that I should have said also.
Mm-hmm.
When we make this argument about a few bad Black cops, we are avoiding dealing with the systemic issue, because the issue isn't a few bad cops. The issue, like you said, is what is the culture, but also what is the structure that says, given these values that we have as a country, that this is okay, right? We have a culture that says, Sandra Bland, that whole thing over putting out your cigarette, told her to put out her cigarette. She said, no, I don't have to. All of that escalated, right? So how do we value the use of force? How do we address the systemic nature of these issues that allow the problem to recur? And something else about this few bad cops. I would like us to acknowledge that we are dealing with underreported data. A few years ago, we had a speaker that we brought to our firm. We do not have a comprehensive national database that tells you all the unarmed Black people who have been killed. Each police jurisdiction reports in voluntarily. Um, like interrogatories, people are creative about how they respond to questions. And things that may be defined one way in one jurisdiction may be defined differently in another jurisdiction. So I would say this for those who say a few bad cops, go to your Black friends and ask them in their families how many generations have they been having the talk. That should answer the question for you for how long this problem has been ongoing. Because for generations, people have had to teach their children how to stay alive.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know the reference, Corey is talking about the talk that Black parents, Black families have had to have about how to stay safe in police interactions. And in order to be transparent and share, I had that talk happen to me when I was 8 years old because my father was pulled over by the police. And I remember saying, "Leave my daddy alone," like, right? And it was like, "Please let daddy live," right? And so, and I have already had, to my point about my son saying, "Am I safe?" The world has this conversation, even without me having it, and that's problematic. So the next question, which I will tee off on, is I keep seeing diversity and inclusion efforts that focus on recruiting attorneys and middle management, but nothing that addresses including staff and succession planning. What are your thoughts on grooming staff for leadership to foster a more inclusive environment? So my response to this is, you do not have an inclusive environment if you have one in which there's not the ability to be professionally developed and elevate in a space. Now, again, not every organization is set up so that there's a direct pipeline to leadership. There's not all spaces to fit everyone who's in that middle staff space, but there are steps within these places that they are in. So if you are analyst 1, you can be analyst 2, 3, and 4, right? If that's not happening, if you're not looking at your staff as to what value they bring, what they are looking for in terms of supplements to their professional development, and you're not providing them with feedback that is constructive and well given in order for them to grow and be responsive and to get better in their role, then you're not investing. And so my response is this, is that organizations should be looking at their staff from the top to the bottom in a way that says, who do we have? Who are our assets? What do we expect from them as individual contributors and then as managers? And then what is the next step? What is the next rung? So everyone should always have a next space to grow to, whether that's in competency, so I'd like to say skills and will, whether that is both on an ad hoc and a systemic process, so that there should be an annual evaluation process, but that should not be the only time in which people get feedback. You want to create a culture in which people can learn and grow. And a big piece of that is understanding who you have within a space. And to your point, whomever asked this question, is that when you are only looking to bring in diversity and inclusion from the outside, when you have people who are diverse in the inside, and I say diverse as the sort of monolith of diverse, and I don't mean specifically race or gender, I mean everything, then you're not actually being strategic about wanting inclusion, right? Because inclusion means I can be who I am in this space, but I can also grow and develop in response to what the culture, community, and needs of the organization are. And that's a symbiotic thing. If not, it doesn't work. So if you got to go outside, then that means there's something wrong in your pipeline. Now, it's not saying you shouldn't go outside, because again, a big piece of helping people grow is to see folks who look like them in higher positions. And that might mean, because you don't have a pipeline that's ready, that you do have to go outside. But good organizational development around diversity, equity, and inclusion means looking at who you have at all levels and seeing what needs to happen in order for them to grow within the organization. Corey, did you want to add anything?
Thinking to the extent that this question is addressing the that other divisive wall in law firms and organizations between attorneys and non-attorneys, I think definitely everything that you said is correct and applies there as well. The professional staff also need to be developed around inclusive leadership. There should be succession planning, there should be diversity, and there should be inclusion, even on the professional staff, business services side, however you want to call it. In any organization, the diversity and inclusion should be holistic. Just ask any female attorney, Black woman, woman of color, how their life is if they have support staff that are racist or sexist. Ask them what their life is like when, folks act like they're difficult to work with, when they give revisions back, but they have nothing to say about male attorneys who throw papers at them. So it's all part of the workday experience.
Absolutely. And if you don't have an understanding of what the work day experience is, that's probably where you should start. Organizations, in my mind, at a minimum, especially now, should be doing organizational assessments. You got to know what's happening internally, and it has to be in a way that is anonymized, so that you'll get the actual information. Because if you're like, I know that we need to do XYZ thing, but you haven't actually gotten the data, then you're probably putting a Band-Aid on something that might be much bigger, or using them on Band-Aid, right? And so right now, there are people who, you should be on some of the calls I have. I'll tell you how it goes quickly. It's Paula, my partner Wendy, we're reaching out because in the aftermath of George Floyd, number one, we want to be responsive. Good. I'm like, yes, responsive. So can you please do an assessment within a week and a half, and then do a training on anti-racism that's only 45 minutes, and then it'll solve everything, right? Wrong. And speed and expediency does not get you what you need in terms of these processes. And I can't say it enough, because we have to be responsive. Being responsive means putting action in place. It doesn't mean that you've solved whatever the thing is. And so we have to get that in our head. But that assessment piece is such an important piece of this. You have to know what the issues are before you can respond appropriately. Corey, I'm going to take dealer's choice and go to some of the questions that are in the chat, because I want to be responsive to who's online. We answered the first one. Oh, okay. Do you have any points or advice on how you approach a conversation about race with someone who you know is racist, but who doesn't understand that their view of race is distorted and that they are actually racist without realizing they are? Corey?
Okay, so this one, I really think this is where the intersection of your authenticity, your gifts and your skills, as well as your relationship, comes into play. All of those things are going to determine how you approach this person. And it's going to range from using humor to illustrate, to simply saying, do you realize what you just said was racist? And all of those things are going to depend on your personality, what works best for you. Are you the kind of person who can use examples? Are you the kind of person who can say, that struck me what you just said. Do you think A? Right? And I'm trying to think of an example that would illustrate this. I once had a partner one time who said to me, he had this thing about how it's a horrible day in America to be a white man and da 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 da. Anyway, one of our travels for work, we're eating as we're waiting to catch a flight to come back. And we get on this topic about affirmative action, which sometimes people confuse diversity for affirmative action. They're not the same thing, but you can look that up on your own time. And he had some opposition to many of the clients who were demanding more diversity on their cases. And so the whole premise of his arguments were white men who are qualified and able are being displaced by Black people who are not. And so questions I asked him were like, really? So do you see a lot of Black people in leadership? Do you see a lot of Black people running corporations? Because the myth has always been that these Black people are coming and they're taking jobs and opportunities. So where are they? Because even in our law firm, we didn't have them. And then I also said to him, interesting your view on of affirmative action. Did you know that the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, as well as diversity efforts, the primary beneficiaries have been white women? He was surprised. He didn't believe me. And I told him, I said, look it up. He debated. I said, look it up. A few weeks later, he was talking about some diversity stuff, and he was throwing out the statistic about the benefits of diversity and how the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action have been white women. So sometimes asking people questions will help them go further. Sometimes asking people questions like, I don't understand, explain, will require them to take a step back and say the thing again and help them realize that they just said something problematic. Now, if it's based on a faulty premise, you can then say, it sounds like you're basing this on just like the Black on Black crime. Really interesting. Did you know that the white on white crime, so to speak, rate is similar? You know, so those are ways in which you can do things, but you have to think about the relationship you have with the person. You have to think about what you're effective at. And you have to also think about the situation, right? You know, Thanksgiving dinner with family is a different situation than, you know, maybe the workplace in the moment where something happened very quickly.
Yeah.
I just shared with a colleague last night that we had somebody doing some yard work for us, a white male that we contracted with, and he showed up with three Hispanic guys who were actually the ones doing the work. But then he made a comment, and he had already said something to my husband separately I found out about that was point blank racist. But he said something to me about these are good amigos, unlike others. These are good amigos. And I was frozen. And I'm usually very quick. I'm usually very quick. And so sometimes you will be in situations where something will happen so quick and your brain can't keep up. You're like, wait, what? Does he mean good people as opposed to bad people? Why is he using the word amigos? So it's a complex question, but it takes practice.
It is. And I think the point that you made about context is such an important one, because my initial reaction to the question was, it has to be safe for you to to engage. And particularly in the workplace. And I don't mean physical safety, although I do also mean that. I mean that psychologically and experientially and politically within your organization, how is your interaction in the way that you're planning it? How might that affect you detrimentally? That's not saying that it may that I'm saying if it would that you shouldn't have the conversation, but I'm saying that a best practice is to really consider all of the pieces before you engage in it, because sometimes when you run to either your own defense or to someone else's defense without putting that context in there, it can be detrimental for all involved. And this is a good place where I love saying, are there allies you can engage to be supportive of you here, to help with fostering these conversations? Because to the point, if you're a person of color, and I'm making that assumption, but maybe I probably shouldn't, that if you are a person of color and you're trying to engage in this, if they're racist, the likelihood of them wanting to engage with you in the conversation and dialogue is low, right? But if you are someone who's a peer or has a similar affinity, you have to think about strategy, right? Everything that Corey said as to how you might want to engage in this. And I think one point I want to definitely underscore is oftentimes people who have such very dug in philosophies and perspectives, the only way to shift them is through statistics, data, facts, right? And empathy. I'm a big believer, and I say this to white men all the time, you are the key to diversity and inclusion efforts being successful. You are the key. And oftentimes when I do unconscious bias training, I start with saying, talk to me about a time when you didn't feel included. And that is a draw to empathy connection, right? it is not, if I said, tell me a time when you had a racist thing happen to you, that, okay, they're not going to say, oh, when I was 3, because they haven't had those experiences in those same ways. But we all have an experience that we can connect to when we don't feel as if we had belonged, or we were being treated differently because of something and someone or who we are. And so that then gets them to that point where it's like, oh yeah, that didn't feel good, right? That empathy muscle kicks in. And also the ego muscle and the power muscle that are imperative in having that intersection occur to having, and I'm using white men, but I mean people in power generally, to engage and become and get on that path to becoming allies. Because once they realize they are key to the answer, then something goes, oh, I am the key. I'm the key to this, right? Where I've seen white men be like, yes, I am the key, Paula. And it shifts how they interact, right? But then too, saying to them, remember when it felt bad that this thing happened to you? As a leader, as the person who is the key to this shift, how might you act in order to change this? Now, that's very different than somebody who is outwardly racist, right? And my other response there is this: is it your job and duty to be putting on your cape of anti-racism with this person? And the answer might be yes. But I'm much more in a space of advancing self-care and protecting yourself from trauma before I'm saying to you, put on the AR cape and that says anti-racist and say, how dare you, you're a racist, and I'm going to give you 6 books to read. But if you feel like there's space there, then everything that Corey said that you should do is absolutely appropriate. And I think the next question that's in the chat is a wonderful supplement to this question that came in just now, where it's asking about empathy. Do you have any tips or best practices in DEI work for increasing empathy in those who are apathetic to issues of the oppressed? And I know that we're talking about anti-Black racism right now, but I want to give you a scenario that occurred to me recently that really helped to open eyes of someone, again, who was a white male leader, a law firm leader. He was sharing with me in a coaching session, Paula, I'm just so frustrated about this whole pronouns use, and why do I have to use pronouns? And it's just so like, ugh. And I smiled, as I often do, in order to not scream. And I said to him, if your name was Richard, and I insisted on calling you Dick, every single time that you spoke, I referred to you, instead of Richard, I said, Dick, da da da, because, it's a nickname for the word Richard, but that was not what you wanted. How would that make you feel? Right? So I took it less from the about the diversity content and more to about you are hearing people say, this is what I need from you for us to be able to interact and engage. And personalizing it, right, by giving an example that's not, the person and how they identify, right? Your name is such an important part of who you are, shifted that. And so when trying to get people to think empathy, it's a delicate balance between empathy and sympathy, right? You don't want them to be, I feel so bad for those Black people. It's more like I was saying to you about me asking the man, who are the Black people in your life, right? Because that's in that empathy piece where you now are like, oh, it's personal for me. Where you hear people say, well, now that my daughter has married a Black man, I understand the plight of Black people. I always am like, did you not have the news before? But anyway, so it's that. It's things like that. And it's not, there's not a across the board answer, but it's having them understand their piece in it, having it be personalized for them. And sometimes that means sharing some of your own experiences in order to trigger empathy. But as I mentioned in the last webinar, the balance between that and putting your pain on display for someone's edification is a delicate one, and I don't like it. I don't need you to have to say, this thing happened to me in order for someone to be able to get it. There's enough information that is readily available at the tips of our fingers for us who has the want and intent to be better to find that. So I hope that was helpful. It's really connecting people to experiences that will help them to be better in understanding. So they can't hear me? Oh,
yeah.
Can you hear me, Corey?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
There was a point where you broke out.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I get wild with my hands and then.
One thing I will say about empathy is that listening is a critical skill that's part of part of empathy. And too many times we are listening to argue back, we're listening to make a point, we're listening to rebut, but just listening to let it sink in. And so part of how you can help people become more empathetic is help them to listen. Also, stories. Part of what, she didn't call it out, but part of what Paula has really done is story. And I find, stories are data. And that's what I tell my people. It's not just numbers and metrics, but the other form of data is stories. It's qualitative data. And people, I saw another note about people can't hear. So I don't know if now they can't hear me. But you can hear me, Paula? Okay. Well, part of is hearing the stories, because when people, like you said, think of a statistic, it's one thing. But when they think about you, Paula, that they know, that's a different thing, right? And so that's part of the empathy equation. One thing that I will say to build in on what Paula said earlier, and even on this empathy conversation, we can't force a horse to drink, even if you can force it to the stream. And one of my favorite quotes that I use in my work, because I am a bit of a people pleaser and I do have a recovering perfectionism issue. And I say this, I've used this in presentations, so it's not new and it's not my quote. It comes from Scott Stratton, but I quote it all the time. Don't try to please the haters. You're not the jackass whisperer. It's the same thing. I know that in my work, there are some people that I will never reach. There are some people who are dug in. There are some people who are not going to try. And you have to be very wise about knowing when those situations come up. But there's some good stuff on empathy in the TED space, and I touch on it in my TEDx talk called Just Belonging. So check that out. Paula, what else would you add on empathy? Because I feel as if empathy is a crucial component
It is of
of
leadership,
all of it.
of being a good person, of all
Yeah.
of the things. So I would just add to what you're saying, and is you are more empathetic when you, to Brian Stevenson's point, get proximate. And this is why I love when people get out of their comfort space and interact and engage in places that they might not do. Just a quick story before I want to answer that last question that's in there, is I had an opportunity to go to Israel 4 years ago. And I'm from Brooklyn, New York, right? I'm like, I know the Jewish experience. Come on, I don't need you to tell me about Jewish experience. Until I went to Israel and I was like, wait a minute. I learned so much. And for me, it was that getting proximate helped me to be understanding, helped me to hear differently, helped me to override and undo some of the conscious biases that had been instilled in me by family members, by things that I have read, etc. And so, I don't need you to have to go to another country to do that, but you can, listen to webinars. You can ingest information that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, because that's the point of this. As I said in the last session, my therapist says that growth begins where comfort ends. And if we want to grow and be better, we have to get uncomfortable, because our comfort is biased. Our comfort is routed in all the isms. And that's for your racist colleague, that's for you, that's for all of us individually. We have to shift in order to grow. There's a question in the Q&A about suggestions on how to deal with burnout, self-care from doing DEI work.
Important one, address that.
Yeah.
We gotta
So
talk about that. I know we're at time, but we gotta talk about that because
yeah,
it
I
is
want to
taking people down.
exactly. So number one, and I'm guilty of this, but I will say it because I know it's a best practice, is sleep. You must sleep. There's a account that's on Twitter and that's on Instagram called the Nap Ministry. And I love it because it literally reminds you that you must sleep and rest your body in order to do this work. And if not, you're not doing the work at your best self. And then the people and the impact that you want to have is lessened. Number two, you must eat. you must you must sustain yourself, like all the things your body your body needs in order to be functioning are needed in this space. And oftentimes the people who do this work neglect themselves in order to accomplish it, burn out, and then have to replenish. And then the time they have to replenish, the world goes into a different space. Also, self-care is therapy. It is connecting with someone else to help you navigate the challenges and the trauma that you experience in doing this work. My therapist saves lives every single day of her life. She is a whisperer in terms of being able to, for me, help me to navigate the challenges. I have challenges every day, but without being able to banter back and forth with her and have strategies on how I can manage it, I would not be able to survive. Similarly, coaching, right? Oftentimes people who do this work think, okay, I got this, I'm the doer. But, you know, if I didn't have colleagues and friends like Corey and Maya Hazel and other people who are expert in this space who I can say I'm having this issue, then I wouldn't be responding to my clients' needs in the way that I need to. Ideating with them helps me to be sharper about what I do, and it also helps to know that other people are feeling the challenges in a similar way. Right there is this content in community. Right. And so some of those things, I also every single day meditate for 10 minutes every morning. Before my feet hit the ground, I use an app called Headspace in order to center myself to do the work that I have to do. I also drink a lot of water, right? Because water connects your body to the work that you need to do. It helps to center you. So those are some of the suggestions that I have about doing, and it's a good one because even the people who are on here who are not diversity professionals, a lot of us are being asked to do DEI work on top of the job you already have. So you must center yourself and self-care for yourself in order to manage that extra burden. Corey, what do you want to add? What else do we need to do? Cry. I know that we got to cry.
Yes, we need to cry in safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care is critical. Do the thing that you know will bring you true rest, because many of us are not truly rested. And this is true across the board, particularly with this pandemic, because work and home has blended. Many of us are working even longer hours. With the COVID pandemic and then the racial pandemic, a lot of people in the diversity space are working even longer hours. I am working a crazy amount of hours every single day. Yesterday, I was on camera from 10 a.m. till about 3:30 nonstop. There was no time to eat in between. My husband texted me and asked if I had eaten today. I said no, and that he brought me that Popeyes that I flashed you. But do some things. I've taken up painting. I garden. Go for that walk. Do something. Compassion fatigue is real. It is very, very real. Ooh, yes, I love that.
I
I love
color.
that. So you're
And
doing
this is this,
coloring.
this is a coloring book that is for Black women who need
Yes,
to have safe spaces to color. It
yes,
literally makes me feel better to just sit back and color in all of my anger and frustration about life, because it we ha- we don't take the time if we don't take the time.
yes. We have
So
to make the time. We have to
yeah,
unplug. It's like
yes.
driving your car on E. Oh my God, I just got a text. You need to quit this not eating thing. Okay. I forgot to
Thank you for
disable
all the
text
people
on
who
my
are on
iPad.
there.
So that showed up at the top. Okay. Apparently one of my friends is watching this webinar and has my number and can text me. But we have to do better. We have to do
Yes,
better.
I'm
And
share my.
sometimes having a tribe is helpful. Microaggressions ain't micro. So true. We have to, get a tribe of people who can encourage you. Get a tribe of
Yes,
people who will say, have you eaten today? Have you
yeah,
unplugged? Have you, go to the beach, do
yes,
whatever. It is
yes,
critically important. And something to note, a lot of the people in the DEI space are women,
yeah,
minorities, or people
yeah,
who are LGBT,
yeah,
or a combination of all of those, which means
yeah.
in addition to you showing up to work and helping devise organizational solutions, coaching leaders, devising the new strategy, because we're trying to solve 400 years of racism in 10 days. In
Yeah,
addition to all that, you are dealing
yeah.
with the
At
impact of the
intersection.
pandemic yourself.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yes.
it's real.
So with that wonderful reminder, I'm going to close us out by saying to you all, thank you for engaging with us on additional questions and strategies on anti-Black racism dialogues. And whether you're having those dialogues on a one-on-one basis or organizationally, remember, you're not as good as someone who can persuade as you might think you are. So do what you can do within the space that you can do it in. Engage allies to help with conversations that are harder. Encourage accountability when people are saying and doing things internally and externally that should not be happening. And take care of yourself. When we're in trauma, we're not at 100%. Take care of yourself, and I encourage you all to stay connected with the Belonging Project. We have several upcoming webinars for you to continue to your learning. And if you have recommendations for suggestions on other things that we can dialogue about, we encourage those things as well. With that being said, wash your hands, wear a mask, take care of yourself, and get some sleep this weekend. Thank you, everyone, and have a connect with me and Corey on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Right?
And connect on Twitter as well, because we'll continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you coming.